The family I was babysitting for said never to open the basement door, but tonight I had to. I'd been babysitting for the Harrington family for about 3 months when Mrs. Harrington first mentioned the basement. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and she was showing me where they kept the emergency supplies in case the kids needed anything while she and her husband were at their weekly dinner date. She walked me through the kitchen, pointing out the first aid kit under the sink and the flashlights in the drawer by the stove. Then she stopped in front of a heavy wooden door near the back hallway, one I'd noticed before but never really thought about. Her hand rested on the doorknob for just a second too long before she turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Whatever you do, don't open this door," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. "The basement is off limits. Always." I nodded slowly, trying to process why she seemed so serious about a simple basement. "Is there something dangerous down there?" I asked, thinking maybe they had exposed wiring or a flooding problem. She hesitated, her fingers still touching the doorknob, and for a moment I thought she might actually explain. But then she just smiled, that practiced smile parents give when they don't want to worry you, and said it was just old family storage, nothing interesting, but the stairs were unstable, and she didn't want anyone getting hurt. Mr. Harrington appeared in the hallway behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder, and they exchanged a look that lasted a beat too long. "Just remember what Catherine told you," he added, his voice friendly but firm. "That door stays closed, no exceptions, no matter what you hear. No matter what I hear." The phrasing stuck with me as they left that evening, the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway fading into the quiet suburban night. I stood in the kitchen with their 2 kids, 7-year-old Milo and 5-year-old Rebecca, both already absorbed in a cartoon on the living room TV. The house settled into its evening routine around us, the refrigerator humming, the old heating system clicking on and off, all the normal sounds of a family home. But now I couldn't stop thinking about that basement door and the strange way both parents had warned me about it. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and focus on the kids, making them dinner and helping Milo with his homework, while Rebecca colored at the kitchen table. Everything seemed perfectly normal for the next 2 hours. The kids were well-behaved and easy to manage, exactly the kind of babysitting job that paid well and required minimal effort. Around 8 o'clock, I started their bedtime routine, getting them into pajamas and brushing teeth, reading them both a story before tucking them into their beds. Milo's room was decorated with dinosaur posters, and Rebecca's with princess castles, both spaces warm and comfortable and exactly what you'd expect for kids their age. I pulled their doors mostly closed, leaving them open just a crack like Mrs. Harrington had instructed, and headed back downstairs to clean up the kitchen. That's when I heard it for the first time, a soft thump from somewhere below me, coming from the direction of that basement door. I froze with my hands in the soapy dishwater, listening intently to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind against the windows. Then it came again, definitely a thump, followed by what sounded like something heavy being dragged across a concrete floor. My heart started beating faster as I dried my hands and moved toward the hallway where the basement door stood. The door itself looked completely ordinary in the dim light, just a normal wooden door with a regular doorknob and a simple deadbolt lock above it. I noticed for the first time that the deadbolt was engaged, locked from the outside, which struck me as odd. Why would you need to lock a basement from the outside unless you were trying to keep something in? I pressed my ear against the door, barely breathing, straining to hear anything else. For a long moment there was nothing but silence, and I started to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Old houses make noise, I thought. Pipes settle, foundations shift. There's always a logical explanation. But then I heard it again, clearer this time because I was right up against the door. It wasn't just a random house sound. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone or something was moving around down there with purpose. I backed away from the door, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they had a dog they'd forgotten to mention, kept in the basement while they were gone. But that didn't make sense because I'd been here dozens of times and never heard barking or seen any evidence of a pet. Maybe it was their heating system, some kind of mechanical issue that made noises that sounded like movement. I pulled out my phone and typed out a text to Mrs. Harrington, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard as I tried to figure out how to phrase this without sounding crazy. I heard some noises from the basement. Just want to make sure everything's okay? But before I could hit send, I heard footsteps on the stairs above me. Milo appeared at the top of the staircase in his dinosaur pajamas, his face scrunched up with worry. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice small and uncertain. "The sounds are too loud tonight." I climbed the stairs to meet him, crouching down to his eye level and keeping my voice calm, even though my pulse was racing. "What sounds, buddy?" He glanced toward the staircase leading down to the first floor, then back at me with wide eyes. "The basement sounds," he whispered. "They're always there, but tonight they're really loud." I felt my stomach drop as I realized this wasn't the first time he'd heard whatever was down there. "How long have you been hearing sounds from the basement?" I asked gently, trying not to let my growing anxiety show. Milo shrugged, his small shoulders moving up and down in the oversized pajama top. "Forever, I guess. Mommy and Daddy say it's just the house being old, but sometimes it sounds like someone's walking around down there." He looked at me with complete trust, expecting me to confirm his parents' explanation and make him feel safe. I wanted to do exactly that, to tell him there was nothing to worry about and tuck him back into bed with reassuring words about old houses and settling foundations. But the look in his eyes told me he knew something was off. That same instinct that was currently making my hands shake slightly as I guided him back to his room. I sat on the edge of his bed and rubbed his back until his breathing evened out and he finally drifted off to sleep, but my mind was spinning the entire time. Once I was sure he was asleep, I crept back downstairs as quietly as possible, avoiding the creaky step third from the bottom that I'd learned about over the past few months. The basement door waited at the end of the hallway, innocent and ordinary in the soft glow of the kitchen light. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether to investigate further or just ignore it like the Harringtons clearly wanted me to. The rational part of my brain said to leave it alone, to respect their wishes and not pry into whatever private family business they were keeping locked in their basement. But another part of me, the part that had been listening to Milo's scared whisper and remembering the strange intensity in Mrs. Harrington's warning, couldn't let it go. What if someone was hurt down there and needed help? What if this was some kind of emergency situation that the Harringtons hadn't anticipated? I pulled out my phone again, and this time I did send the text to Mrs. Harrington, keeping it brief and factual. Hey, I'm hearing some concerning noises from the basement. Just want to make sure everything is okay, and if I should be worried about anything. I hit send and waited, watching the screen for the 3 dots that would indicate she was typing a response. Nothing. I waited 5 minutes, then 10, checking my signal to make sure the message had gone through. It showed as delivered but not read. They were at dinner, probably with their phones put away, trying to enjoy their weekly date night without interruptions. I thought about calling them directly, but that seemed like an overreaction. What would I even say? Your house is making noises and your son is scared? They'd probably think I was being ridiculous, unable to handle a simple babysitting job without panicking over normal house sounds. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and tried to distract myself by cleaning up the last of the dinner dishes, loading the dishwasher and wiping down the counters while actively trying not to look at that basement door. The problem was that the noises didn't stop. Every few minutes I'd hear another thump or scrape, sometimes followed by what sounded almost like a voice, though too muffled to make out any words. I turned on the TV in the living room, partly to distract myself and partly to cover up the sounds, flipping through channels until I found a cooking show that required zero mental engagement. But even with the TV on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in this house. I kept glancing at the hallway, at that closed door with its engaged deadbolt, wondering what the Harringtons were so desperate to keep locked away. My phone finally buzzed with a response around 9:30, nearly an hour after I'd sent the message. Mrs. Harrington's text was short and firm. Do not open that door under any circumstances. We'll be home by 11. Everything is fine. Just ignore any sounds. Stay upstairs with the kids if you're concerned. The message should have been reassuring, a clear instruction from the homeowners about their property. Instead, it made everything worse. The way she'd capitalized "not" and the complete lack of explanation made it clear there was something in that basement they didn't want me to see. Something they were willing to keep secret, even if it meant I spent the evening anxious and confused. I read the message 3 more times, trying to extract any additional meaning from the sparse words. Everything is fine. But if everything was fine, why did they need a deadbolt on the outside of the door? Why had Mr. Harrington specifically said no matter what you hear, as if he knew there would be sounds? I was still staring at my phone when I heard Rebecca crying upstairs. I took the stairs 2 at a time, grateful for the distraction from my spiraling thoughts. She was sitting up in bed with tears streaming down her face, her favorite stuffed bunny clutched to her chest. What's wrong, sweetie? I sat on the edge of her bed and smoothed her hair back from her forehead. She hiccuped and wiped at her eyes with small fists. I had a bad dream about the basement man, she whimpered. He was trying to get out. My blood ran cold. The basement man? I kept my voice level even as my heart rate spiked. Who's the basement man, Rebecca? She looked at me like I'd asked a silly question. The man who lives in our basement. Mommy and Daddy take care of him, but sometimes he gets loud. He was loud in my dream and he was banging on the door. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. A man who lives in the basement. The parents who take care of him. The locked door and the warnings and the sounds that were apparently normal enough that both kids knew about them. I managed to calm Rebecca down with promises that she was safe and it was just a bad dream, lying through my teeth while my mind raced with increasingly dark possibilities. Once she was settled back into sleep, I went to Milo's room and gently shook his shoulder until he stirred. Milo, I need you to wake up for just a minute, I whispered. He blinked at me sleepily, confused about why I was waking him up. I need you to tell me about the basement man, I said softly. Who is he? Milo rubbed his eyes and yawned. That's just what Becca calls him. Mom and Dad said he's a family member who's sick and needs to stay down there where it's quiet. They take him food and stuff. He's not supposed to come upstairs because he might scare us. My hands were shaking as I processed this information. A sick family member locked in the basement, kept hidden from the outside world, fed and cared for in secret. The scenario painted itself in my mind in increasingly horrifying detail. Are you scared of him? I asked. Milo shook his head. Mom said he's like a really sick grandpa who needs special care, but sometimes I hear him yelling and it sounds scary. Do you know his name? I pressed. Milo's face scrunched up in thought. I think I heard Dad call him Philip once, but I'm not supposed to talk about him. I tucked Milo back in and returned downstairs, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. My phone showed it was almost 10 o'clock, which meant the Harringtons would be home in about an hour. I sat on the couch and tried to think rationally about what I'd learned. On one hand, caring for a sick elderly relative wasn't inherently sinister. Plenty of families dealt with situations where a loved one needed specialized care, especially if they had dementia or other conditions that made them difficult to manage. Maybe Philip was violent or prone to wandering, and the locked basement was actually the safest option for everyone involved. Maybe the Harringtons were doing their best in a difficult situation and simply didn't want to burden their babysitter with the details. But on the other hand, keeping a person locked in a basement felt fundamentally wrong, no matter how they tried to justify it. What kind of medical care was he getting down there? Was he even mobile enough to need a locked door? And why would they hire a babysitter without warning them that there was an adult man living in the basement of the house, even if he was supposedly secured? I pulled out my phone and Googled elderly care laws, trying to figure out if what the Harringtons were doing was even legal. The results were complicated and varied by state, but most sources agreed that confining someone without proper oversight could constitute false imprisonment or elder abuse. I was deep into an article about home care regulations when the sounds started again, louder this time. Not just thumps, but actual banging, rhythmic and forceful, like someone was hitting the door from the inside with something heavy. I jumped up from the couch and moved toward the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The banging continued, steady and insistent, and then I heard it clearly. A voice, rough and desperate, shouting words I couldn't quite make out, but that were unmistakably human and unmistakably distressed. "Help," the voice called out, muffled but distinct. "Please, somebody help me." I stood frozen in the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to open that door while my brain tried to rationalize reasons not to. Mrs. Harrington had been clear in her instructions. Mr. Harrington had warned me no matter what I heard. But this wasn't just house sounds or an elderly man shuffling around in a secure room. This was someone actively calling for help, someone who sounded terrified and desperate. I moved closer to the door, my hand reaching out toward the deadbolt. The voice came again, clearer now that I was closer. "Please, I don't know who's up there, but I need help. They're going to kill me. I need to get out of here before they come back." My hand was on the deadbolt now, fingers wrapping around the cold metal as my mind struggled to process what I was hearing. This wasn't a sick grandpa. This was someone who believed they were in danger, someone who was begging for rescue. But what if this was exactly what the Harringtons had warned me about? What if Philip really was mentally ill and prone to paranoid delusions? What if he was dangerous and opening the door would put me and the kids at risk? The voice continued, now taking on a desperate, pleading quality that cut through my hesitation. "I've been down here for weeks. They only come twice a day with food. Please, please let me out. I have a family. I have kids. They must be looking for me." The mention of kids made my decision. I slid the deadbolt back with a metallic click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. My hands moved to the doorknob and I turned it slowly, every nerve in my body screaming warnings as I pulled the door open. The basement stairs descended into darkness, and a smell hit me immediately, musty and stale, like a space that hadn't been properly ventilated in a long time. I fumbled for a light switch and found one on the wall just inside the door. When I flipped it on, a single bare bulb illuminated a steep set of wooden stairs leading down into shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "I'm coming down. Just stay calm." I started down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight, my phone clutched in one hand with the flashlight on, even though the bulb overhead was working. The basement opened up below me, larger than I'd expected, and as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the space. It was finished, with drywall and carpet, almost like a rec room or extra living space. But the furniture was strange. A mattress on the floor with rumpled blankets, a small table with empty food containers, and in the corner, a bucket that I realized with horror was being used as a makeshift toilet. And there, on the mattress, was a man. He was maybe 40 years old, thin to the point of looking gaunt, with a scruffy beard and haunted eyes that locked onto me the moment I appeared. He was wearing what looked like the same clothes he'd been in for days or weeks, stained and wrinkled, and there was a chain attached to his ankle that ran to a bolt in the wall. "Oh my God," I breathed, my hand flying to my mouth. This wasn't an elderly relative being cared for. This was a prisoner. The man's eyes filled with tears as he saw me. "Thank God," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm Adrian Fletcher. I was taken from a parking lot 3 weeks ago. Please, you have to help me get out of here before they come back." My mind reeled as I processed what I was seeing. The Harringtons, the nice suburban family with the well-behaved kids and the weekly date nights, had a man chained in their basement, a man who'd been kidnapped, who had a family somewhere searching for him, who'd been kept as a prisoner for weeks. I started down the rest of the stairs, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. "We need to call the police," I said, already pulling up my phone. Adrian's eyes went wide with panic, and he held up his hands. No, wait, you can't call from here. They have the house monitored somehow, I've heard them talk about it. If police cars show up, they'll know something's wrong and they might hurt the kids. They've threatened that if I escape, they'll disappear and take Milo and Rebecca with them. My blood turned to ice. Monitoring? What kind of monitoring? I glanced around the basement, suddenly paranoid, looking for cameras or listening devices. Adrian pointed to a small device mounted in the corner near the ceiling. Camera, he said. I watched them install it. I don't know if it has audio, but they definitely watch it. They check on me through their phones, which meant the Harringtons might already know I'd opened the door, might already be seeing me standing here having this conversation with their prisoner. I had maybe minutes before they saw the alert and realized what was happening, before they left their dinner and rushed home to deal with the situation. My hands were shaking as I looked at Adrian's chain, a heavy metal link padlocked to a ring on his ankle. Do you know where the key is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, even though if there was audio, it was already too late. He shook his head. They keep it with them. I've tried everything to break the chain, but it's solid. You need to get the kids and run. Get them somewhere safe and call the police from there. Don't let them use the children as leverage. Everything in me wanted to do exactly that, to run upstairs and grab Milo and Rebecca and get them far away from this house and their parents who were apparently capable of kidnapping and imprisonment. But another part of me knew that taking someone else's children without permission, even in a situation like this, could be seen as kidnapping itself. And what if the Harringtons were already on their way home? What if we couldn't get away in time? I need to think, I said, pacing the small space at the bottom of the stairs. Adrian sat on the mattress watching me with desperate hope in his eyes, like I was his only chance at survival. I thought about the timing. They were supposed to be home by 11, which was still over an hour away, but if they were monitoring the basement camera, they could already be heading back. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it in shock. A text from Mrs. Harrington. Where are you? Why aren't you responding to the doorbell camera? My stomach plummeted. They could see the upstairs too. They knew I wasn't in the living room or kitchen where I should be. I typed back with shaking fingers. Just checking on the kids. They were restless. Be back downstairs in a sec. I watched the 3 dots appear as she typed, praying she'd believe the lie. Her response came through. Good. We're leaving the restaurant now. Should be home in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes to figure out what to do. Get out of here, Adrian urged, his voice intense but quiet. Take the kids and go. Don't worry about me. Just make sure they're safe and call the police once you're away. I looked at him. At this man who'd been chained in a basement for weeks, who was telling me to abandon him to save children he'd never met. The pure selflessness of it made my decision. I'm going to get help, I said firmly. But I'm not leaving you here. I ran back up the stairs, my mind racing through options. I couldn't call the police directly without tipping off the Harringtons. I couldn't take the kids without potentially making things worse. But maybe I could create enough of a distraction to buy time for real help to arrive. I grabbed my phone and opened my contacts, scrolling past my parents and friends until I found my older brother Nathan's number. He was a lawyer, dealt with crisis situations professionally, and would know what to do. I hit call, and he picked up on the second ring. This is Nathan. It's me, I said. My voice rushed and panicked. I need help, and I don't have much time to explain. I'm babysitting, and I found a man chained in the basement. The parents are coming home in less than 20 minutes, and I think they're dangerous. There was a brief pause, and then Nathan's voice came back. All business. Where are you exactly? Give me the address. I rattled off the Harringtons' address, adding that there were 2 kids upstairs who were innocent in all this. Nathan told me to stay calm, that he was calling the police right now and giving them my location. Don't confront the parents when they get home, he instructed. Act natural if you can. Tell them the kids were fussy, or you had to clean up a mess. Anything to explain why you weren't visible on their cameras. Keep yourself between them and the children at all times. The police are going to show up fast and in force for a kidnapping situation. I hung up and tried to steady my breathing, tried to think about how to play this when the Harringtons walked through the door. I went upstairs and checked on both kids, finding them still peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding around them. Then I went back down to the living room and sat on the couch, turning the TV back on and trying to look casual, even though my insides were churning with terror. The basement door was still open. I'd forgotten to close it in my panic, and I could only hope the Harringtons wouldn't notice immediately. I stared at my phone, watching the minutes tick by. 15 minutes until they were home. Where were the police? How long did it take to dispatch units for something like this? I sent Nathan a quick text asking for an update, and he responded immediately. 4 units en route, ETA 8 minutes. Stall if you can. 8 minutes until the police arrived. 12 minutes until the Harringtons were home. I was going to have to time this perfectly. Needed the police to show up before the parents, but close enough that I didn't have to face them alone for long. I heard a car in the driveway, and my heart stopped. They were early. I looked at my phone, 7 minutes since I'd called Nathan. The police weren't here yet. I stood up from the couch on shaking legs as I heard the front door unlock. The Harringtons walked in with smiles on their faces, Mrs. Harrington calling out a cheerful hello as they removed their coats. How were the kids? Mr. Harrington asked, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. Great, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. They went down without any problems. Mrs. Harrington moved into the living room, her eyes scanning the space with what I now recognized as paranoid vigilance. "And you didn't hear anything unusual?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I opened my mouth to respond, to make up some story about vacuum cleaners or TV volume, but then I saw her gaze shift to the hallway, to the basement door standing open with light spilling out. Her entire body went rigid. Her hand shot out and grabbed her husband's arm, squeezing it hard enough that I saw him wince. "The basement," she said, her voice tight. He opened the basement. Mr. Harrington's friendly expression vanished instantly, replaced by something cold and calculated. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the exact moment he decided I was a threat. "Catherine, get the kids," he said quietly. His wife moved immediately toward the stairs while he stepped toward me, blocking my path to the front door. I backed up, my hands raised in what I hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "The police are already coming," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They know about Adrian Fletcher. They know everything." Mrs. Harrington froze on the stairs, turning back to look at her husband with wide, panicked eyes. "He told me they were coming," Mr. Harrington said, his voice eerily calm. "Dispatch just called my phone. We have maybe 3 minutes." His hand moved to his pocket and I tensed, terrified he was reaching for a weapon. But he just pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "We need to run," Mrs. Harrington said, her voice rising with hysteria. "We need to grab the kids and go right now." "No," her husband said firmly. "That makes us look guilty. We stick to the story." "The story?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You kidnapped someone. You chained him in your basement. What story could possibly explain that?" Mr. Harrington looked at me with something almost like pity. "Adrian Fletcher is Catherine's brother. He's severely mentally ill, schizophrenic with violent tendencies. We were trying to get him help, but he kept running away from treatment facilities, putting himself and others in danger. We brought him here to keep him safe until we could get him into a long-term care program. The psychiatrist's appointments are all documented. The lie was smooth and well-rehearsed, the kind of story that might actually work if there wasn't a terrified man chained in their basement, contradicting every word. That's not true," I said, my voice stronger now. "He told me he was kidnapped from a parking lot. He has a family who's looking for him. He's not your brother." Catherine's face crumpled, and she sank down onto the stairs, her head in her hands. "I told you this wouldn't work," she said to her husband. "I told you someone would figure it out eventually." "What did you do?" I asked, horror dawning as I realized this was worse than I'd thought. Who is Adrian Fletcher, really? Mr. Harrington's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that would have seemed normal in any other context. "He's a witness," he said flatly, "to something I did, something that could put me in prison for a very long time. He saw me, recognized me, and I couldn't let him go to the police. So we took him." The casual way he said it, like he was describing a minor inconvenience rather than a life-shattering crime, made my skin crawl. "And you were just going to keep him down there forever?" Mr. Harrington shrugged. "Until we figured out a more permanent solution." Catherine sobbed into her hands. "This was supposed to be temporary. You said it was just until things cooled down, but it's been weeks, and you won't let him go." I stared at them, at this suburban family who'd seemed so normal and kind, who paid well and always had snacks ready and treated me like part of their household. They were monsters. The sound of sirens cut through the night, faint but growing louder. Mr. Harrington's face hardened, and he moved toward the stairs. "I'm getting my kids," he said. "We're leaving through the back before the police get here." "You're not taking them anywhere," I said, moving to block his path even though he was twice my size and I had no way to actually stop him. "Those children are staying here." He looked at me with cold calculation, and then his hand shot out, shoving me hard. I stumbled backward, my hips slamming into the coffee table, pain exploding through my side. Catherine screamed at her husband to stop, but he was already taking the stairs 2 at a time. I scrambled up, ignoring the pain, and ran after him. He reached Milo's door first, and I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. He shook me off easily, but the commotion had woken Milo, who appeared in the doorway rubbing his eyes. "Daddy?" he said sleepily. "What's going on?" The sirens were loud now, right outside, and red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Mr. Harrington looked at his son, then at me, then at the lights, and something in him broke. "I'm sorry," he said to Milo, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, buddy." Then he ran past me, down the stairs, heading for the back door. Catherine was still sitting on the stairs crying as police pounded on the front door, shouting for the occupants to open up. I scooped up Milo and called for Rebecca, who appeared in her doorway clutching her stuffed bunny and looking terrified. "It's okay," I told them both, trying to sound calm even though my hands were shaking. "The police are here to help. You're both safe." I carried them downstairs, staying away from the front door where police were still shouting commands, and sat with them on the couch as Catherine finally moved to unlock the door. Police flooded in, weapons drawn, voices overlapping as they secured the scene. Catherine put her hands up immediately, surrendering without resistance, while officers split off to search the house. Two of them found Mr. Harrington trying to climb the back fence and brought him back in handcuffs, his face blank and defeated. Detective Isabel Reyes took charge of the scene, a tall woman with sharp eyes who immediately assessed that the children needed protection. She called for social services while other officers went down to the basement to find Adrian. I sat with Milo and Rebecca, keeping them calm and shielded from the chaos, while their parents were read their rights and led away in handcuffs. The kids didn't understand what was happening, kept asking why Mommy and Daddy were leaving. When were they coming back? I didn't know how to answer. A young officer named Davis stayed with us while Detective Reyes went down to the basement. When she came back up 15 minutes later, her face was grim. The paramedics were bringing Adrian up on a stretcher, and I caught a glimpse of him as they passed. He met my eyes and mouthed, "Thank you," before they carried him out to the waiting ambulance. Detective Reyes sat down across from me and pulled out a notepad. "I need to get your statement," she said gently. "Start from the beginning and tell me everything." I walked her through the entire night, from the sounds I'd heard to Rebecca's nightmare about the basement man to finding Adrian chained downstairs. She took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing darker as the full scope of the situation became clear. "You did the right thing," she said when I finished. "Opening that door probably saved that man's life. The Harringtons were talking about a permanent solution, which we interpret as plans to kill him. You interrupted that plan." Social services arrived around midnight in the form of a kind-faced woman named Gloria, who specialized in emergency child placement. Milo and Rebecca clung to me as she tried to explain that they'd be staying with another family for a little while until things got sorted out. I felt my heart breaking for them. They didn't ask for any of this, didn't deserve to have their entire world destroyed because of their parents' crimes. "Can I stay with them?" I asked Gloria. "Just until they fall asleep?" She looked at Detective Reyes, who nodded. "You can ride with them to the placement home and stay for a bit. Just be back here within 2 hours to finish your statement." I rode in the social services van with Milo and Rebecca, holding their hands while Gloria drove through the quiet streets to a house on the other side of town. The foster family who answered the door were older, grandparent types who seemed experienced with emergency placements. They had a room ready with 2 beds and some toys, everything designed to be comforting for traumatized children. I stayed while the foster parents got the kids into clean pajamas and settled them into bed. Milo grabbed my hand before I could leave. "Are we ever going to see Mommy and Daddy again?" he asked, his eyes wide and scared. I didn't know how to answer that. Eventually, I managed, but right now, they have some very serious problems they need to deal with. These nice people are going to take care of you until everything gets figured out. He nodded slowly, trying to be brave, and I felt tears burning in my eyes as I kissed his forehead, and then Rebecca's. When I got back to the Harrington house, it was swarming with investigators and crime scene techs. Detective Reyes found me and walked me through the rest of my statement, asking detailed questions about everything I'd observed about the family over the past 3 months. Had I noticed anything unusual about their behavior? Any strange visitors or unexplained absences? I told her about the locked basement door, the warnings from both parents, the way they'd seemed overly concerned about monitoring systems and cameras. She showed me photos of Adrian from before his kidnapping, a healthy-looking man with bright eyes and a genuine smile, completely different from the gaunt, terrified person I'd found chained in the basement. "He's at the hospital now being evaluated," she said. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished, with some signs of physical abuse, but he's going to survive because of you. His family has been notified and they're on their way to the hospital now." The investigation would reveal the full scope of the Harringtons' crime over the following weeks. Mr. Harrington, whose name was actually Gregory, had embezzled over $2 million from his investment firm using an elaborate shell company scheme. Adrian Fletcher had been his accountant at the firm and had discovered the fraud during a routine audit. He'd confronted Gregory privately, trying to give him a chance to turn himself in before going to authorities. Instead of confession, Gregory had drugged Adrian's coffee during their meeting and, with Catherine's help, transported him to their basement. They'd kept him there for 23 days, trying to figure out how to dispose of him without raising suspicion. The plan had apparently been to stage an accidental death, maybe a hiking accident in the mountains several hours away. But they'd been struggling with the logistics. Catherine had been against the whole thing from the beginning, according to her statement, but had been too afraid of her husband and too worried about losing her children to go to the police. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The camera footage from the basement, Adrian's detailed testimony, and the digital trail of Gregory's embezzlement all combined to ensure both parents would be facing serious prison time. I had to testify at their preliminary hearing, sitting in a courtroom and recounting the night I'd found Adrian while Gregory and Catherine sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits. Catherine cried through most of it, occasionally glancing at where Milo and Rebecca sat in the gallery with Gloria from social services. The kids looked confused and sad, too young to really understand what their parents had done. The judge ordered both defendants held without bail, citing flight risk and the serious nature of the charges. As the bailiffs led them away, Catherine turned and called out to her children. "Mommy loves you," she said, her voice breaking. "Please don't forget that." Milo buried his face in Gloria's shoulder, while Rebecca just stared straight ahead, clutching her stuffed bunny. The trial itself wouldn't happen for almost a year, and in that time I stayed in touch with Gloria and the foster family who'd taken in Milo and Rebecca. The kids were struggling, as anyone would expect. Milo developed anxiety and started seeing a therapist twice a week. Rebecca stopped talking for almost 3 months, communicating only through drawings that her therapist said showed clear signs of trauma. I visited them when I could, though Gloria and their therapist both warned me not to become too attached, since the goal was permanent placement, not maintaining connections to their old life. But I couldn't help it. These kids had been through something horrific, and I felt responsible for them. Like I needed to make sure they turned out okay despite everything. Adrian Fletcher reached out to me about a month after the kidnapping. He was back home with his wife and 3 kids, still recovering physically and mentally from his ordeal. He wanted to meet in person to thank me properly. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I almost didn't recognize him. He'd gained back the weight, his color was better, and his eyes had lost that haunted look. He'd brought his wife, Sophia, and their kids, 3 girls ranging from 6 to 12. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being brave enough to open that door. I don't know how much longer I would have survived down there." His wife hugged me, tears streaming down her face, while his daughters presented me with drawings they'd made. They were all of me as a superhero, which made me laugh and cry at the same time. I wasn't a superhero, I told them. I just did what anyone would do. But Adrian shook his head. Most people would have followed the rules, respected the parents' wishes, assumed there was a good reason for their warnings. You questioned it, you investigated, and you acted even though you were scared. That's the definition of brave. The trial was intense and emotionally draining. I had to testify for over 4 hours, with Gregory's defense attorney trying to paint me as someone who'd overstepped boundaries and violated the family's privacy. He suggested I'd been paranoid and reckless, that I'd endangered the children by opening a door I'd been specifically told not to open. But the prosecution was ready with Adrian's testimony, with medical evidence of his condition, with documentation of Gregory's embezzlement. The jury deliberated for 2 days before coming back with guilty verdicts on all charges: kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Gregory was sentenced to 32 years in prison. Catherine, who'd cooperated with prosecutors and shown genuine remorse, got 18 years. At sentencing, both were allowed to address the court. Gregory's statement was brief and seemingly unremorseful, focused mostly on how the system had failed him and forced him into desperate measures. But Catherine's statement broke me. She apologized to Adrian and his family, her voice shaking with emotion. Then she turned to where Milo and Rebecca sat with their foster parents and began to sob. "I failed you," she said to her children. "I was supposed to protect you, and instead I brought danger into your lives. I made choices that were selfish and wrong, and now you're paying the price. I hope someday you can understand that I loved you, even though I did terrible things." Milo started crying, reaching for his mother, but the foster mother held him gently back. Rebecca just stared straight ahead, her face blank, still not speaking months after everything had happened. The foster family who'd taken in Milo and Rebecca ended up adopting them permanently about 18 months after the arrest. The couple, Richard and Dorothy Chen, were experienced foster parents who'd successfully adopted 3 other children over the years. They worked closely with therapists to help both kids process their trauma and adjust to their new reality. I attended the adoption finalization hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom as the judge made it official. Milo had come out of his shell considerably, though he still had nightmares and struggled with trust issues. Rebecca had started talking again, though she was far quieter and more withdrawn than the bubbly 5-year-old I'd first met. After the hearing, the Chens invited me to the celebration dinner they'd planned. Milo ran up and hugged me tight, and Rebecca gave me a small smile that felt like a huge victory. "You saved us," Milo whispered. "Not just from that night, but from everything." I shook my head. "Your new parents saved you. I just opened a door." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Opening that door had set off a chain reaction that had destroyed one family, but ultimately saved multiple lives. Adrian was home with his family. Milo and Rebecca were with people who would protect and love them properly. And Gregory's embezzlement victims were getting restitution from the seized assets. The whole experience changed me in ways I'm still processing years later. I went back to college after taking a semester off to deal with the trial and everything that followed. I changed my major from business to social work. Inspired by Gloria and the way she'd handled the kids with such care and professionalism, I wanted to help children in crisis, to be someone who paid attention and acted when something didn't seem right. I graduated 2 years later and got a job with Child Protective Services, investigating reports of abuse and neglect. The work is hard and emotionally exhausting, but it feels meaningful in a way my previous plans never did. I think about that night often, about the choice I made to open the basement door despite explicit instructions not to. In my training and my work now, I've learned that there's a careful balance between respecting family privacy and recognizing signs of danger. I've learned that sometimes rules exist for good reasons, and sometimes they exist to hide terrible secrets. Last year, on the 5-year anniversary of that night, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Rebecca, now 10 years old, written in careful handwriting on lined paper. Dear superhero babysitter, it read. Dad says I should write to thank you for saving me and Milo. I don't remember a lot about that night, but I remember you holding me and telling me everything would be okay. You were right. Things are okay now. Mom and Dad, Richard and Dorothy, are really nice, and Milo is doing good in school, and I'm learning to play piano. I still miss my first parents sometimes, even though I know what they did was bad. Is it okay to miss them? My therapist says yes, but I wanted to know what you think. Thank you for being brave. Love, Rebecca. I wrote back immediately, telling her yes. It was absolutely okay to miss them, and to have complicated feelings about everything that happened. I told her I was proud of how strong she'd been, and that she was going to grow up to be an amazing person. We've corresponded a few times since then, always with the Chen's permission and oversight, and it's been healing for both of us to stay connected. Adrian Fletcher and I meet for coffee every few months. He's back to work at a different firm now, though he had to do extensive therapy to deal with the PTSD from his captivity. His girls are growing up healthy and happy, though they understand their dad went through something terrible and came out the other side. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the fear of death, it was the feeling that he'd been forgotten, that nobody was looking for him anymore. Knowing that someone was coming, that you risked yourself to help me, that made all the difference, he said. It gave me hope when I had none left. The Harrington case became somewhat famous in legal circles as an example of how ordinary families can hide extraordinary crimes. It's been used in training for social workers and law enforcement, a cautionary tale about not taking things at face value and the importance of trusting your instincts. I've been asked to speak about my experience at several conferences, and while it's uncomfortable to relive those moments, I do it because I hope it might help someone else recognize warning signs and act on them. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd listened to the Harringtons' warning, if I'd just ignored the sounds from the basement and went about my evening. Adrian would likely be dead, his family would never have gotten closure, and 2 children would have grown up with parents who were capable of murder. The weight of that alternate reality sits heavy on my shoulders, but I also think about Milo and Rebecca, about how their lives were torn apart because I made the choice to intervene. They lost their parents, their home, everything familiar. Yes, they're in a better situation now with the Chens, but the trauma of that night and the trial will stay with them forever. There's no clean resolution to a story like this. No purely happy ending where everyone walks away unscathed. I still babysit occasionally, though I'm much more careful about the families I work for now. I ask more questions during interviews, pay attention to inconsistencies, trust my gut when something feels off. I've never encountered another situation like the Harringtons, thank God, but I'm vigilant in ways I wasn't before. Every closed door is now a question mark, every warning a potential red flag. The basement door itself, the physical door that started everything, was eventually removed when the house was sold. New owners gutted the place, trying to erase the horror that had happened there. The finished basement was torn out and returned to bare concrete, the chain bolt cut away and the whole space sanitized. But I wonder if the new owners know what happened there, if they feel any echo of the terror and desperation that once filled that space. I like to think that spaces hold memories, that somehow Adrian's suffering left an imprint that can be acknowledged and healed. 5 years later, I still have nightmares sometimes about that night. In the dreams, I walk down those basement stairs over and over, finding different horrors waiting at the bottom. Sometimes it's Adrian, but he's already dead, and I'm too late. Sometimes it's Milo and Rebecca chained there instead, looking at me with betrayed eyes. Sometimes the door won't open at all, and I hear screaming from the other side but can't get through. I always wake up sweating, heart pounding, taking several minutes to remember that everyone survived, that I made the right choice. My therapist says the dreams will fade with time, that trauma responses are normal and healthy, and nothing to be ashamed of. But they haven't faded yet. Catherine Harrington wrote to me from prison once, about 3 years into her sentence. The letter was forwarded through my attorney since I'd requested no direct contact. She apologized profusely, explaining that fear of her husband and fear of losing her children had paralyzed her into inaction. She'd known keeping Adrian was wrong, but hadn't had the courage to stop it until it was too late. She asked if I could forgive her, if I thought Milo and Rebecca would ever forgive her. I didn't respond. I couldn't find it in myself to offer her absolution, not when I'd seen what her choices had done to everyone involved. Some actions are too big to forgive, consequences too severe to smooth over with apologies. Gregory Harrington has never expressed remorse. He maintains to this day that he was driven to desperate measures by an unjust system, and that Adrian's kidnapping was Catherine's idea that spiraled out of control. His appeals have all been denied, and he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Occasionally, a reporter will contact me asking for an interview about the case. I always decline. The story has been told enough times in enough ways. I don't need to add my voice to the chorus of sensationalism that surrounded the trial. What happened that night was real and traumatic, and not entertainment for people who weren't involved. The one interview I did agree to was for a documentary about child welfare and foster care. They wanted to talk about Milo and Rebecca's successful placement and adoption as an example of the system working correctly. I spent an hour on camera talking about the resilience of children and the importance of support systems and professional help. The documentary aired on PBS last year, and I got messages from several people saying it inspired them to become foster parents. That felt worthwhile, like something good coming from the whole terrible situation. Adrian's youngest daughter is now the same age Rebecca was that night. Seeing her at his house recently, carefree and happy and safe, hit me hard. This is what childhood should look like, I thought. Not fear and secrets and locked basement doors. Milo is 13 now and Rebecca is 11. Richard Chen sends me updates occasionally with photos of them at school events and family vacations. They look healthy and well-adjusted in the pictures, though he admits in his messages that both kids still struggle with anxiety and trust issues. Milo wants to be a police officer when he grows up, inspired by the detectives who handled their case. Rebecca is in art therapy and creates beautiful paintings that her therapist says help her process her emotions. I keep all the photos in a special album, a reminder of why I chose this career path. Last month, I was assigned a case that gave me chills. A report had come in about a family where neighbors heard screaming from the basement. My supervisor assigned it to me specifically because of my experience with the Harrington case. When I arrived at the house, a nice suburban home not unlike where the Harringtons had lived, I felt my hands start to shake. The mother who answered the door was defensive immediately, insisting everything was fine and that neighbors were overreacting. But I'd learned to trust my instincts. I insisted on seeing the basement, and after some resistance, she led me down. There, I found her teenage son, locked in what she called a timeout room for his behavior problems. He'd been there for over 6 hours with no food or water. I called it in immediately. The boy was removed that day and placed in emergency foster care while charges were filed against both parents. As I drove away from the house, I thought about how history echoes itself, how patterns of abuse repeat across families and communities. But I also thought about how intervention is possible, how speaking up and acting can break those cycles. The boy is safe now because someone reported what they heard and because I followed up. The system worked the way it's supposed to, even if it doesn't always. I'm not a hero despite what Adrian's daughters drew all those years ago. I'm just someone who opened a door when instructed not to, who questioned authority when it seemed wrong, who chose action over compliance. Sometimes that's all it takes to save a life. But the decision to open that door, to defy explicit instructions and risk the consequences, still haunts me. What if I'd been wrong? What if the Harringtons had been telling the truth about a sick relative? What if my interference had made things worse? These questions don't have satisfying answers. I acted on instinct and incomplete information, and it happened to work out. But it could have easily gone another way. The ethics of intervention are complicated and messy and not reducible to simple rules about when to act and when to trust. What I know for certain is that Adrian Fletcher is alive because I opened that door. His 3 daughters still have their father. Milo and Rebecca escaped from a home where their parents were capable of murder. Those facts are solid and inarguable. Everything else, all the complexity and trauma and difficult questions, stems from that one choice made in a moment of crisis. I would make the same choice again, knowing what I know now. Even with the nightmares and the weight of what I witnessed and the complicated aftermath, I would still open that door. Because the alternative, leaving Adrian to die and the children to grow up with killers for parents, is unthinkable. Some doors need to be opened, no matter what we're told. Some secrets need to be exposed, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us. And sometimes the rules we're given exist not to protect us, but to protect the people harming others. Learning to tell the difference is the work of a lifetime. I think about the Harrington basement often, about the smell of that space and the chain bolted to the wall and Adrian's desperate eyes. I think about how close we came to a very different ending, how the timing of my phone call and the police response and the Harringtons coming home early all could have shifted slightly and resulted in tragedy instead of rescue. 5 years later, the physical door is gone, but the choice remains. Open it or keep it closed. Trust authority or trust yourself. Play it safe or risk everything for what you believe is right. I opened the door, and I'm still living with the consequences, both the good and the difficult. But I sleep better, knowing Adrian Fletcher is tucking his daughters into bed tonight. I breathe easier, knowing Milo and Rebecca are growing up in a home where they're truly safe. And I show up to work every day, ready to face whatever doors need opening, whatever secrets need exposing, whatever children need saving. The basement is gone, but the lesson remains. Sometimes the things we're told not to question are exactly what we need to examine most closely. Sometimes the locked doors are the ones most urgent to open. And sometimes the act of simply refusing to comply, of choosing courage over comfort, is enough to change everything. That night changed the trajectory of multiple lives. It certainly changed mine. I'm a different person than the young college student who took a babysitting job for extra money and thought he understood how the world worked. I know now that evil can hide behind friendly faces and that monsters don't always look like monsters. But I also know that ordinary people can be extraordinarily brave when the situation demands it. I wasn't special or particularly courageous. I was just someone who heard suffering and chose to respond instead of ignore. That should be the baseline, not the exception. The Harrington children will carry this story with them forever. It will shape their relationships and their worldview and their understanding of trust and safety. I carry it too, though in different ways, as a reminder of both human depravity and human resilience. We all survived that night, but we're all still healing from it years later. Some wounds take a lifetime to close. When I visit Adrian's family now, his daughters sometimes ask me about that night. They're old enough now to understand the basics of what happened, that their dad was taken and hurt, and that I helped get him back. They ask if I was scared, if I knew what to do, if I ever regret getting involved. I tell them the truth, that I was terrified and confused and just did my best with the information I had. I tell them that doing the right thing doesn't always feel heroic in the moment. Sometimes it just feels necessary and urgent and like the only option available. I tell them their dad is one of the bravest people I know for surviving what he went through and coming out the other side still able to love and trust. They seem satisfied with these answers, though I know as they get older, they'll have more complicated questions about trauma and recovery and how people heal from terrible things. I don't have all those answers yet myself. The last time I drove past the Harrington house, new people were moving in. They had a moving truck in the driveway and kids running around the yard, completely ordinary family starting a new chapter in what they probably think is just a nice suburban home. I wondered if the real estate agent disclosed what happened there, if they knew they were moving into a place where someone was tortured and kept prisoner. I wondered if the basement still feels different, even after the renovations, if there's any trace of what occurred there. But mostly I hoped they'd be happy, that the house could be redeemed by new memories and new love, that spaces aren't forever tainted by the worst things that happen in them. Detective Reyes told me once that these cases stay with you forever, that the ones where you save someone become touchstones you return to when the job gets hard. She was right. Whenever I encounter a difficult case or face a decision where the right path isn't clear, I think about that basement door. I remember the moment my hand touched the deadbolt, the split second where I could have chosen differently, where I could have followed instructions and walked away. And I remember Adrian's voice calling for help, and the choice crystallizing into something simple and clear, despite all the complexity around it. Someone needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. Everything else was just noise. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.